didn't know he was ill. Not that anyone needs to report those things to me, but 81, which I consider young. Especially these days. My dad's 80, will be 81 in June. Even to have professors that are 75, 80 is not unheard of anymore. I cannot take credit for these packets. I wish I could. They are incredibly well put together. So, as I mentioned, when you all take your exit exam for this degree, we will ask you to compare and contrast the philosophies of Bennett Reamer and David Elliott. The things we talked about in class are a great overview. The things in the books are a great overview. And this is just really well done. I want to point out the way the outline is organized. It's not exactly how I would organize it, but he starts with the similarities. So you see outline number 2. And then, so similarities, but within all these contexts, within the context of creativity, within the context of meaning and music. Makes sense? And then as you turn the page, he then talks about differences, so on and so forth. And then you get to the bottom of the 3rd page, and he starts talking about some of those words that I've thrown at you that we haven't talked about in depth. But formalist, praxialist, as you turn the page, you start to see things like contextualist, universalist, synergistic view, on and on and on. Those words in music ed change more over time, as they should. That's what research does. It should cause us to think about things more and more in depth to find the most truth, although the ultimate truth typically is always elusive. So after the first couple of pages, then he goes into prose. The prose is pretty well written. So for your own enjoyment and leisure this weekend, I'm sure.
I'll take it to the loading with me.
Yeah.
It'll be more entertaining.
And then, I don't know if this would be multi-sensory learning or not, but it's just different formats for different ways of people looking at things. So he takes all the information that he's given already and just puts it in a different format. So, hang on to this. I hate the thought of hanging one of the things just for a test. Hang on to it, for many, many reasons. Any thoughts about philosophy for you that are different now than they were even a month ago or 3 months ago? Anything you want to share?
Well, I said this the other day, but this isn't so much a change, but it's not a stark change, but I've always believed that everyone deserves music education, but I never really thought about how we have to kind of fight for everyone to get music education, not just because it's right, but to make ourselves, relevant, and I really didn't realize how rampant it was, the whole, I guess the opposite philosophy that only some people need to be in band or whatever. I just never realized that until here.
I had a mentor when I taught in Texas that looked at me one day. I was frustrated about a student, and he said, "Mark, not everybody was meant to be in band." And while it sounded good in my ears at that time because it was in support of how I was feeling, I walked away thinking, I don't know if I believe that completely. And what if I were to put it in my own words? And so for a while I lived with this thought that music is for everybody, band is not. So I lived with that for a while, and I felt pretty good about myself. And years later now, I'm not so sure that's exactly how I feel, because it makes band seem somehow separate from music. That makes band seem somehow not an option for everyone that wants that as an option. I think I was telling Laura probably a month ago, I almost feel like I'm coming full circle with my belief that we do have to laud the non-musical outcomes of being in music. I don't know anything about orchestra. I couldn't even name the instruments. I might could guess a violin if you pointed it to me. I could call the man with the stick or the woman with the stick, the conductor. See what I just did there? But that was it. If my child came home every day or every other day talking about this Bach prelude or this trip they were taking and seemed gleeful, genuinely happy every time they talked about this as a parent, I'm still not asking her what a viola is or what the name of the bottom string is or if I can please come to the concert because I want to hear that Bach prelude. I just know my child's happy. And I know that my child is gleefully happy, that there's some kind of thing in her life that I can't provide that is being provided by the school, and that has a lot of worth. And I still wrestle with how to figure out how to approach that in my own philosophy and in my own philosophy of what you should do, what I should do, what Lindsay should do, Dr. Miles should do when it comes to being an advocate for music in our schools. Because maybe the child playing the songs they like on the radio is the closest they're going to get. And maybe playing suspended cymbal in the front ensemble is largely for those non-musical outcomes, but they are going to get some benefits that I'm not so sure that we can measure that are musical and are non-musical, in addition to what that kid says when they come home every day. Does that make sense? You know, you have that kid, that's what they're going to play. They're going to play suspended cymbal in the marching band. And I can't believe that that in and of itself is creatively rewarding. However, I don't know and you don't know what effect it has every day when they get to the crescendo and they hear the band behind them. I mean, it may trigger something, it may do something that it's got to have some kind of worth. Other thoughts? Certainly life, I was going to say this. Musical experiences and life experiences always trigger us to think about our philosophy differently. Taylor, is that why you asked me yesterday about whether or not a child should be in an ensemble?
No, I just heard about it and it made me mad.
Taylor Bielski and Taylor had asked me my own philosophies of should we keep a student in large music classes if they will never achieve? At what point do we push them along because they're never going to play at the level that we think they need to? My answer is never. We provide opportunity. You have to become creative. Otherwise, we do become elitist. And if we believe music's for everybody, we can't ever be elitist, ever. As much as we pick on Kenny G, there's some woman out there that has everything he's ever written, and it may affect his. See, I went right to a woman.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I did that. Affects her as much as Henneth affects me. It's really hard to weigh all that out. Look like a commercial that slams him, the Snickers commercial,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and he allowed himself to be slammed. It was pretty crazy.
I don't know how you just compared Kenny G to Paul Hamilton. That was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to go like this in his all the time, in every song.
But I can imagine, you know, I remember the Avon lady, what was it, Miss Williams. For some reason, when the Avon lady came over to my mom's house, we weren't allowed to be inside, so I would go outside. And her son was my age, and we did not get along at all. So if I say Avon lady, is that a Generation Y thing you guys get? Where people from
It's like Mary Kay now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All
I was
right.
thinking water, but yeah, makeup salesman.
Okay,
Say
yeah.
that.
Yeah, she
Okay.
come see my mom, and so my mom makeup and stuff.
Yeah.
Her son, the Avon lady's son, and I went to the same school. Did not like each other. His name was Ross.
How do you remember all these random, like?
It's a disease. So she loved Lawrence Welk and worshipped that television show. And it seemed like even if I only, you know, you're as a kid, somehow you want to see this lady, and so you have an excuse to come inside to get some Kool-Aid before you go back outside and play again, whatever. And it seemed like every time I walked through the house, she was telling my mom about the last Lawrence Welk episode and how wonderful it was and all this stuff. And as the years passed and I got in the band, she stopped me one day and she said, "Oh, you're in band, what are you playing?" And I was playing trumpet at that time. And I was playing trumpet. She said, "Well, I hope you guys play good music like Lawrence Welk." And I said, "Well, I'm not so sure we'll ever play Lawrence Welk." She said, "Well, you don't have to. That's the best music in the world." And very unlike me to buck authority, I said, "No, it's not." And of course, my mom goes, "Mar!" I said, I'm sorry, I don't like it." And she was like, "How can you not like it?" Yeah, her heart may go pitter-pat as much as it does when I hear the end of Pines and Rome. Although I won't describe my emotion in this way as pitter-pat, but you know, and there's no explaining it. And that's one of the cool things. Again, if magic really does exist, music is a great example. There's no explaining it. All right, so hang on to this Bennett Reamer, David Elliott's outline. I'm gonna, for all the online students, I'm gonna put it into a PDF and make it available on Blackboard. All right, best practice. It's one of the things that we talk about in the Mark book. It is a very important part of what we do. Music ed research started in about the 50s, and some of the research was not very sound, and we're still kind of finding our way. So it seems like, for me, this idea of best practice is almost like saying, like, "Well, I've got this idea. Let's practice our instruments so we get better at it." Like, yeah. However, it does make a lot of sense, and it is something that we should research. So what'd you find out? What's the definition of best practice?
Is a method or technique that has consistently shown results superior to those achieved with other means, and that is used as a benchmark.
Okay. We have a different wording.
Best practice is a technique or methodology that, through experience and research, has proven to reliably lead to a desired result. And then it goes on.
Set up guidelines.
Yeah.
I like the next sentence. I'm gonna read the next sentence.
Do it.
Okay. A commitment to using best practices in any field is a commitment to using all the knowledge and technology at one's disposal to ensure success.
Okay. Lindsay?
I found this definition: commercial or professional procedures that are accepted or prescribed as being correct or most effective.
Correct or most effective? Yeah, because correct is a term we could argue what that means exactly. I do like the word set of guidelines. And some of those guidelines, I think we have to follow exactly, as closely as we can. And some of those guidelines depend on the situation, depend on the class that you're teaching. Of course, best practice is very much motivated in the business world through the gathering of money. If I can have best practice being utilized in my corporation, then we'll make more money, therefore we need to do that. I don't remember who I was talking about, who I was talking with this recently. Well, I think it was Dr. Miles. Company A and Company B are, let's say, in the same town. They have the same kind of clientele, but one is showing a much larger profit. Then those things that they're going to find out that they're not doing that the other company is doing, all is a form of, an example of best practice. In the business world, let's talk about computers. It's an easy one. Best practice in the computer world would tell me that if I don't change best practice rapidly, I'm going to get left behind. So sometimes best practice is just beyond our reach, and someone else just happens to get there before us. It's the Michael Phelps thing. You know, they're pushing just a little bit harder at the very end of the race, and they're always just a little bit ahead of us. And we're trying to chase them and figure that out to stay ahead of the game. In education, I think we fail to see that it's the exact same thing, or it should be the exact same thing. We talked a while back about the analogy of Western civilization form of teaching. We went from sitting on a rock and talking to boys outside on the grass to moving all that indoors to having boys sitting in wooden chairs in a room with wooden floors and a male person in front of them at a lectern simply lecturing. And we still hang on to that today. A lot of people think that is the definition of teaching. So, before we go on to the next two questions or areas about best practice, I don't know if we've talked in depth about just defining the word teaching or describing the archetype teacher. So let's go back just to the word teaching before we talk about the ideal teacher. So what is teaching? We're looking for best practice in the field of teaching. Let's define teaching.
I feel like teacher is kind of a misnomer. I feel like it's more of that as a teacher you're a guider more than anything. You help people find answers to questions. Just like the idea of, the frog thing. You may never need to open a frog, but you figure out ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Learning one thing adds to just cognitive development. I'm learning how to use my brain in different ways, and all those different ways somehow make me get to another level of intelligence. So, teacher as leader, someone who leads you to questions, helps you figure out how to lead yourself to answers to questions. Is there a benefit to the teacher saying, being factual, just simply giving you facts? C sharp on the saxophone. Is it a sharp or a flat note if I use a traditional fingering? If it is a Bundy saxophone,
Flat.
incredibly flat. And a half step away on D is incredibly sharp. And that in itself could be fact that I just simply need to give you. And that's great, wonderful, fine, we need to know that. I'm always in shock when I sit down with orchestra or band directors and they want to talk about their wind sections and what we can do to improve. And I always start with, what knowledge do they have? And usually the person will look at me and go, what do you mean, what knowledge do they have? What knowledge have you given them that they can use on a regular basis to help them? And this saxophone thing is usually the first example I give. Well, how's your saxophone section? Oh, they're pretty good. Awesome. Do you know what reed each student's playing on right now? No? Okay. I think you start there. Do you know what brand instrument they're all playing on? No? I think you need to know that too. What mouthpiece are they all on? What ligature are they using? When's the last time you asked a junior to hand you their mouthpiece so you can simply look and see at how the ligature is on the reed, how the reed is on the mouthpiece, what ligature they're using? All that leads to tone and intonation, does it not? Okay? And that's just equipment. Those are just facts. There is a right and wrong way to put a reed on an instrument. If we get to a point of slight argument, we're talking about professional players, or really good college players. Bottom line is, there's a wrong and there's a right way. And that's what we teach them first. Why would I want a middle school kid to know that this note is incredibly flat on their horn and this note's incredibly sharp? So they can adjust. Best way to avoid a danger is to
Tell someone about it.
know of its existence, right? I know it's there. But we know, hopefully, through teaching experience, certainly brass class, we talk about it a lot. We mentioned this a little bit yesterday. I can tell you about it, I can teach it to you, but then I have to put it in context. So what I'm going to do next is hand my saxophone players a piece of music and say, see the red pen on your stand? Circle every C sharp and every D. And then above the D's, I want you to draw an arrow. Which way? Up or down? Down. C sharp, draw it up. That's somehow going to get them closer. If I don't do it again, it's still not going to stick as well for everybody. How can I make their lives even better, saxophonists?
An alternate fingering.
Teach them alternate fingerings and teach them when it works. How many clarinet players walk into this building, first year in their high school, and don't know diatonic versus chromatic fingerings on clarinet? They're trying to do crossover fingerings while playing fast passages, and it just makes no sense. So when has simply never given them that level. So, teacher, back to Ryan's answer. Teacher's guide, teacher helps. Teacher means you're someone who leads someone to actually or ultimately learn from themselves, learn for themselves. Okay? We're also agreeing, however, that sometimes a teacher's job is to simply give facts. Some believe that by giving students facts and explaining why they are the way they are to some degree, I'm not going to go into great detail teaching a 6th grader why this note is sharp or why it's flat. Although smart kids are going to ask you why. Because that's just the way they make saxophones. And maybe that's how you leave it at first. But eventually by saying, well, in order to get most of the notes in tune, something's got to be out of tune. It's just the way that physics works. So on your instrument, it's going to be all the main buttons and none of the buttons. And it's just the way it is. And some people have researched and believe that it's a combination of these two things. Give them facts, but some reason, let them in on the secrets, but let them in on the intellectual side of it. Don't just give the fact. And tell them that you're teaching them so that they can learn for themselves. Don't just do all these things. Tell them that's what you're doing. That we start to kind of grow our best students that way. Teacher gives facts. Teacher explains why the facts are the way they are. Teacher is intuitive enough to know how to go far enough or when to stop based on the student's abilities. And the ultimate goal is that these are lifelong learners, people that have skills that allow them to continue to be intellectually curious the rest of their lives. If we're curious, people that are curious look for answers. Think about that for a second. People that are curious look for answers, whether they find them or not. Someone might say, well, what about people that are really curious and never look for answers? I don't think that exists.
Maybe that's wondering. People are wondering. I wonder. Oh well.
This hamburger tastes funny. Oh well. Vacation.
Sounds like you have personal experience with that.
The movie Vacation, where the dog pees on the picnic basket, and the grandmother's eating the sandwich, and Clark goes, "Oh my God, the dog peed on the basket," and the grandmother looks at her sandwich and goes, "Keeps eating." That's as far as it goes. Sorry for the analogy. That's as far as it goes. Here's what we got on tape. Maybe some people, and sometimes people just aren't ready for that. Sometimes people just aren't ready for that. As I said at Grand Nationals last weekend, Ron Harden, who's a good friend of mine that is responsible for all the visual stuff that happens with Carolina Crown, if you know that group. We're talking about teaching movement technique, and we kind of ascribe to the same thing. Close your mouth, show them what you want, have them imitate you, and then look for the ways in which their brain and their body doesn't quite perceive that they're doing or not doing what you want them to do. Don't load them up with all this jargon of 1/4 of an inch and shift your weight and these muscles contract and at some point that might be necessary, but initially it's not. So we're good with defining teacher. Therefore, teaching is the action of all of these things. Okay, so best practice. Why does a teacher who is teaching, why is this somehow important in education in general, not just music? Why is the concept of best practice important to the art of teaching?
Because it's the most efficient way to bring on information.
It goes back to the definition that all of you read. It is what we currently know as the best way to achieve what?
The best possible result in learning.
Okay? Let's come up with some kind of word or some kind of short phrase that you like that would describe the outcomes in general. Outcomes is one word, but there could be bad and good outcomes, so I could then say good outcomes, but then how do we define good? We might even say great outcomes. How do we define great? What else is there?
Define improvement.
Okay, improvement, very, very important.
And would you go as far as to say like your ideal outcome is mastery learning?
I believe so. And we define mastery learning as,
Being able to reteach that concept.
you've gathered the information yourself, you've understood the information as well as you can, you have a lived practice in your head, if not in real life, so much so that you can turn right around and teach someone that skill successfully. Mastery, learning. A high school junior that plays viola may be able to play beautifully and can give facts about playing the viola to a beginning 6th grade violist, but it doesn't mean that the high school has mastery learning yet until that person can then teach that concept, which also takes into account mastery teaching. Because that person maybe is not at the point that they can go beyond just presenting facts. To actually get the other person to do it, that person would have to employ the art of teaching, the mastery of learning through the art of teaching. Achievement, we use that word a lot. High achieving. Is it possible that in education we just assume that we all know, and maybe that's okay? High student achievement, or highest student achievement, knowing that we still would need to define that. The ultimate goal is high achieving, highest achieving outcomes, highest achievement, highest student learning achievement. We're getting there. Problem is, it's just really hard. It's really hard. What you define as achievement, what you define as good or great, is different. Let's go to the state of Montana and let's go to their All-State Orchestra Festival. An orchestra gets straight ones, and the judges say this is the best orchestra we've heard in Montana in 3 years. Is it possible that that exact performance could somehow happen in Florida at Florida Orchestra Festival, and that group gets straight 2s? And I would say you have a lot to work on to get to the next level.
Very possible.
Why is that? People in Montana have low expectations.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, I mean,
Great.
It's not
totally.
intentional.
Well, is it possible though that they're not exposed to, because I mean, Montana, there's Billings. That's it. In Missoula, maybe you can count.
The North Expert.
And I mean, literally, Montana is not really populated with a bunch of great orchestras. Whereas you go to some place like Florida where there's Orlando and Miami and Tallahassee, where there are really big programs and schools that have really good orchestras, and it's just something that they're not exposed to. Because I do feel like, yes, you can give a group the same recordings, but recordings are different than live experiences. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They could just have different ideas about what is actually achieving, a concept or whatever their levels of mastery are. So in Montana versus Florida.
Well, like Laura's word, additionally, it's relative. It's relative. If you were to take quantitative research with Dr. Slagle, you would talk about that. And there's all kinds of statistical stuff, things that we do to make things more valid when we're looking at measurement. I'm on a committee here on campus for undergrad research. We looked at, I guess about 40 entries for scholarship, and there were 3 people teams that judged somewhere between 12 and 15 entries. So it may be possible that the 3 of us look at 15 entries and we give them a score, and then the 3 of you do another 10. So there's overlap here with me, and there's overlap here with you. Make sense? So on and so forth. We can't just add up all the scores and say the person with the highest score of all the teams gets the scholarship, because the 3 of us, unbeknownst to us, may be really, really stingy with giving a 10 to anybody in any category. Our highest kid has a 110 and a bunch of 9s and some 8s. Yet the 3 of you, where there is no overlap, may use 10s way more liberally for the best papers. So our best person scores an 88, your best person scores a 98. in education, that's one of our huge problems. In our world of music education across this country and all over the world, it's hard to say what is good, what is great, what is acceptable. So we got to figure out best practice, but best practice, this is the next thing I want you to think about. Best practice in what, and best practice to what end? Now we're talking specifically just music, not just in education. So what do you want that orchestra in Florida that makes straight ones, that does outplay the orchestra in Montana that makes straight ones? What do you want them to have in common? What do you want them to have in common that maybe you fill this room up with educators from all over the world?
Want them to enjoy music and, have some sort of profound aesthetic experience.
Okay. Awesome. I feel really guilty and convicted as a teacher right now. I thought, okay, we're going to talk through tone and pitch and balance and blend, and then we'll eventually get to just making music. So, thanks, Taylor, for going right to the punch.
Not bad.
You're good. No, you're good.
I mean, it's true though, if you were to put the 70 people in here, how many people you could fit in here, they're all gonna go, yeah, I want my kids to play the right notes. I want them to play a tune, I want them to, whatever, play a chord.
I mean, yeah, great performance and miss a couple notes. Oh, sorry, Lindsay.
I have something on my mind, but I don't know what to say.
Say it.
How do you judge the fact that the kids are actually enjoying it? If you're watching from a stage, if you're a judge, I mean, how do you judge that?
That's a study I want to do. I think I figured out how to do it. We can talk about that later. As not to bore or to confuse anybody or to make you think I'm crazy, but not that you might not
Done.
already. I would hope, no matter who was in the room, someone from Auckland, someone from Oxford, somebody from La Paz, all over the world, we would ultimately say we want the students to have an experience that is an aesthetic, visceral experience. That ultimately, even though the rest of the world wants to know, well, what did we get this weekend? Well, we got straight twos. Oh, we're going to get straight ones. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to do what it takes to get there. And I think that's something that we have to continue to agree on in education. Again, it's so hard to define, but I would hope that would be the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to produce a product, my belief, and that product is way more people walking this earth that have what, go all the way back to Ryan's definition of teacher and teaching, that we have led them down a path where they can seek music in a more intelligent way, a more educated way than they could have without us. Laura?
I don't know, just the phrasing, like, you're willing to do what it takes. I don't know if there's a better way to say that, because that sounds like you're not willing to put in the work. I wonder if it would be more appropriate to say not willing to sacrifice my priorities.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That is a better way to say it. Because there are band directors that I've looked at that will go and work with them, and they'll say, well, Mark, I'm just not willing to do all those things to win this contest. And then I want them to explain. And sometimes I find that that's what it is. They may be not willing to analyze their own teaching enough to go, you know, I could teach better. And if I just taught better, they would do better. We often default to, well, these kids just, fill in the blank. They don't care, they don't work hard, they don't practice. You know what? Welcome to the world. It's that way everywhere. So yeah, you're right. Sometimes that really is what it is. What we would hope is it is, as you said, they're not willing to sacrifice what is most important to them. One of the things I loved about being in Michigan is it is 180 degrees different from Texas, fundamentally. Music education is. In Texas, I'll just say it, it's on video. I just think the best teaching pedagogues, if somehow you could measure percentage depth of, they're in Texas. Texas has just bred that for so long that people don't know that it's just what you do. That being said, people will argue there are some stereotypes, and in Texas, however, that the technique, the pedagogy of teaching saxophone so well that I forget to talk about music making and forget about the aesthetic value and forget about the experience. Stereotypes exist for a reason. However, I don't want to slam the state of Texas necessarily. In Michigan, I found almost the opposite. Everybody was so interested in the music making and the music process and the visual process that I would go in and see lots of bad hand positions and bad posture and bad breathing, and I would hear bad sounds. And so at first I was like, well, how can you let this go? How come you're not correcting these embouchures and this air and the slide technique? And the oboe teacher at Eastern Michigan, which is where I taught, phenomenal musician. We never got around to it, but I wanted her to do a lecture for our kids just on music making. What does it mean? How do you figure out how to best play this line musically, so that it not only speaks to you but speaks to the audience? Her and I were talking about this disparity of all these kids. You go out into the schools and all these kids that have been allowed to play with bad embouchures and can't have the range that they need or whatever. She said, Mark, but if the love of music is so great that they come here and I look at Lindsay and say, well, let's fix your hand position and let's put you on a harder reed and let's fix all this, and well, we really need to rethink your tonguing. If this person loves music making, they're gonna look at me and go, okay. If Lindsay comes to me and can play the mess out of the saxophone, but doesn't have a developed musical soul, and I look at her and I say, can we make this more musical? And she gets a question mark over her head. I don't know if I can fix that now. She's 17 or 18 years old, and her musical soul has not been fed. So, if I'm excited that her technique is amazing, but she's not really interested in music making because she's not quite sure what that is, and I'm just now introducing that concept to her, I'm gonna give a scholarship to this other kid. Because ultimately, I know I can fix all the techniques and stuff, and that kid is gonna be a raging musician, if there is such a word. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And to this day, I still think about it. And in my perfect world, you're somewhere. You don't let the technique go. You still teach amazing technique, but you have to produce musical souls that are better off because of you. Or somehow you've helped enrich their musical soul. Thoughts? So best practice in music ed, some of it is very bullet point. Some of it is very specific. Back to the very beginning of class when we were just talking about sometimes a teacher's job is to say facts. A on trombone is second position. If you get up above the staff, that second position is maybe not the same as it is if you're playing the A on top of the staff. But if you have a mature person with good ears and we can talk about that, we can get to that level if we need to. So the fact that A is in second position, you gotta start there. So there are some of those fact things that research has shown us that scares some people. Well, yeah, research, I get it. A bunch of egomaniac people that read books and then tell me how to teach. But have you ever done it? I feel really good at the age of 50 I can go, yes, I have. And I have a lot of colleagues that I love to death and I respect to death, but they haven't done it. So it doesn't mean they can't give the advice, but I think it's maybe easier for someone to take the advice if you've done it yourself. And so I continually discover things through research that help me feel like the way I eventually learned how to teach was sound. But then I almost wish someone would have presented that research to me sooner so I could have gotten there sooner. So, if I'm making a bullet point of specific things that best practice says, no matter whether you're a saxophone teacher or a string-based teacher, or a trumpet teacher, talk less, play more. In the world of best practice, that's a bullet point. That one has to be at the top of the list. If you're giving a lesson, let them play, stop talking so much. If you're teaching orchestra, let them play, stop talking so much. If you're teaching marching band, Stop talking, let them do more reps. Give them something specific to fix and then let them have a chance to fix it. Make sense? Now, with really young kids, we have to be careful with that because physically, they may not be able to play for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes at a time. But relatively speaking, we all talk way too much. Dr. Todd Sneed and I did a lecture in Georgia probably 7 years ago. About 350 people in the room, and Dr. Sneed, assuming that most people had videotaped and watched themselves at some point teach, said, for all of you that have videotaped and watched yourself teach and look at your own teaching, well, how many of you have done that? And 12 hands went up. The look on his face of total shock because what he was prepared to then say, he could no longer say. We talk too much. I am as guilty as anyone. Are there some other bullet points that you kind of discovered that people talk about in education or music ed that we would say or assign or things that we would list as factual things that we need to do as a part of best practice?
Most of what I found was the other side, was the philosophical kind of stuff, almost exclusively. Maybe I'm just bad at this, but that's what I found.
No?
I found an interesting quote in an article just about education, and it said, best practice is always getting better. The best teaching, just like the best science and the best medicine, is a moving target.
Awesome. Say that again.
The whole thing.
Yes.
Best practice is always getting better. The best teaching, just like the best science and the best medicine, is a moving target.
Yeah, absolutely. 50 years ago, the orchestras that play at Midwest, you would have found some orchestras that played incredibly well. There are way more of them now. You would have found a band that played incredibly well. There are more of them now. Choir, more of them now. 50 years ago, wonderful classical saxophonists, there are way more of them now. The target is a moving target, and we just keep getting better, and we keep getting more and more of us. However, percentage of people that are participating is getting smaller. So the top end of the scale is getting better at what it does, but there are fewer people in the pond, which is a problem.
I found a lot of stuff on, like, that I wouldn't really consider best practices. They're more of like a statement of what they're going to teach. Cause like I found, Brevard, Florida, I think is what it is, has a lot of stuff on here about like, what you need to teach as like, this is their standards of stuff. They actually have like an entire sheet, if it'll pull up here, about like what you need to teach and that kind of thing.
You mean like measurable objectives, all
Yeah.
12 scales, keys?
Yeah, but it never really says like, how do you teach that?
Awesome. It is the year 2013 to maybe 2014. This is where we are in music education right now. Best practice is just now emerging in our field. And we are fighting it. We are fighting it. People don't want to be told, stop tuning to the tuba, it doesn't work.
Is that a thing in Texas still, or have they figured that out and they stopped doing that?
This moving target thing, I think if you go to the top programs in the state, none of them are tuning the tuba anymore.
Okay.
They're all using oboe, clarinet, or tuner, and I would just say most of them are using a drone
Yeah.
or a harmony director.
Yeah.
The machine I told you about that plays and the band plays into it. Very much the concept of using a drone. So I would say the same thing for orchestras.
I have a thought, but I just lost it. I'm sorry.
Okay. So the reason it's tough to find it is because there's not much literature out there about it. However, it's incredibly important. Yes.
I'm sorry, I just thought of it. Do you think, sorry.
No, you're good.
Do you think that the reason why it's being kind of pushed away in the music ed world is because there isn't a immediate reward kind of thing? You know, like in the business world, if you don't do best practice, you have to close your business, you lose a ton of money.
Yeah.
In the music ed world, you don't do best practices, you still have a job. Unless you're really terrible, then you get fired. But, or if you touch the kids, then.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's exactly that, and I think we hang on to what we saw work for us. You know, if I taught right now the way that Frank Wicks taught when I was in the East Baton Rouge Parish Honor Band at the age of 16, it wouldn't work. There's some amazing things he did that should still be clung to, but there's a lot of things that just wouldn't work as well. One, just because generations change, people learn differently. I think we fight it because we've never seen anyone do it. I think back to the Montana, Florida thing. If you judge a lot and you realize the depth that's happening in the world of music, you then want to know why. If you don't want to know why, or if you don't think that something's much better than what you're doing, then why change? So I do teach a class that's on best practice only, and we look at it in every faction of music. It is an emerging area of research. Bennett Reamer talks about us finding best practice. David Elliott talks about it. The Mark book talks about it. There are tons and tons of books that talk about things related to best practice, how we learn, how we think, and all of this is starting to kind of butt heads in a good way. Music researchers are looking at what people outside the field are saying about how we think and how we learn, and tying all that into best practice. Don't beat on the stand for your kids. Just don't do it. It does nothing. It does nothing. But I've always done it. It feels good. I feel secure when I do it. Stop doing it. Stop doing it and suffer through your ensemble not having a good time for 4 weeks. And then watch what happens week 5 and week 6 and week 7 when you now allow them to have to keep time on their own and fill time on their own and use their ensemble ears. You'll be shocked. But it's those 4 weeks we don't want to go through. They're painful. They're painful. Awesome. I will see you Monday. Obviously, we won't have class on Wednesday. Tuck this Reamer stuff away on your own. On Monday, I'm going to bring some of these books back, and we're going to talk about a couple things related to best practice specifically. And then I will encourage you, if you've not already, you need to start on your final paper. It's going to be harder than you think. That's not the first time I've said that. If you want to come see me, want to bring me drafts of stuff, let me know. I'd be happy to help. Have a great weekend. Go Tigers. Hotty toddy.
Go
Eagles!
Gonna get destroyed.